Welcome to Tipping Points, episode 26, where we ask key questions about how we balance conservation and development. This webinar series is an initiative of the Open Harbour Generations Research and Conservation, and webinars usually take place on the last Thursday of the month at 1 p.m. I'm Nokwanda Makunga. I am a group leader at Stellenbosch University, and my work centers around medicinal plant biology. In our environment, we use a variety of different approaches that combines the areas of biotechnology, ethnopharmacology, and phytochemistry. So today's focus for this webinar is on Indigenous knowledge systems, and we will focus on medicinal plants and safeguarding food systems in rural areas. Indigenous knowledge systems in South Africa can feed both communities and science, but it is undervalued and poorly understood. So today we will discuss how it could be harnessed and how we can benefit from these different Indigenous knowledge systems. I'm glad to be here with you, and I look forward to a very productive and a very insightful discussion. Please be aware that this session is going to be recorded and will be available on the Open Harbour Generations Research and Conservation YouTube channel. This is also where you can catch up on webinars you might have missed in the past. I also encourage you to sign up for the OGRC quarterly newsletter and also stay tuned for other OGRC social media channels so that you don't miss up on any upcoming webinars and announcements. We are really excited to have such a great turnout today. Please continue to introduce yourselves and engage in conversation in the chat box. And don't hesitate to use that chat box for any questions at any time throughout the whole entire webinar. So I would really like to get going with our discussion today, and I do that by introducing our panel of experts. We have Adeyemi Aremu. He is currently the president of the South African Association of Botanists, and he is based at the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Center at Northwest University. His work actually focuses on the holistic value chain on African flora, and it involves the documentation of Indigenous knowledge, conducting bioactivity testing, as well as phytochemical characterization, safety evaluation in different economic and medicinal plants. He's also interested in aspects that are aligned to conservation and the economic potential of plants. Our next panelist is Sinegugu Zukulu. He is an educator, a storyteller, a social and environmental activist. He has a Bachelor of Education and a Master's of Philosophy in Environmental Management. He is a very strong advocate for mainstreaming Indigenous knowledge systems and for the protection and promotion of Indigenous knowledge as a foundation for sustainable development. And our last member in this group of panelists is Nqobile Masondo. She happens to be a senior researcher at the Agricultural Research Council and leads the Agro-Processing and Product Development Facility. Her research has been focused on processing and developing products from indigenous and commercial fruits and vegetables, as well as industrialized crops and medicinal plants. So I really would like to thank all of you for joining us today as our panel members, and we really look forward to the discussion. The order of the day will kick off with Adeyemi Aremu, and then we'll follow with Sinegugu Zukulu, and last but not least, Nqobile Masondo will give us a 7-minute presentation or so. Please make sure that you do drop your questions in the chat box, and there will be a Q&A session after the presentation. Thank you. Eddie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Knox, and thanks for the kind introduction. I think I'm quite excited to have this opportunity with this great audience. Knox, please, can you confirm, is my slide visible?
Yes, your slides are visible.
Okay, no, thank you so much, and thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, just to give a context, we hear about people's knowledge, traditional knowledge, traditional science. Those are just different terminology when we talk about indigenous knowledge. And it talks across different sectors. When we talk about agriculture, farming, food system, traditional medicine, which is actually one of the core areas that we are going to be discussing today. We talk about issue about gender education. That is indigenous knowledge. How are people surviving? How are people ensuring their survival in their environment? The indigenous knowledge is quite interwoven with people. And one important concern when we talk about indigenous knowledge is that it is not systematically documented. So that's a big problem. That's actually one major challenge that we know, because it's basically orally transmitted from one generation to the other. So we see that this knowledge is quite susceptible to lost if it's not well documented. Also, to just give you another context, when we talk about indigenous knowledge and people, just like a coins, the head and the tail is the same thing. So you cannot separate indigenous knowledge and people. They are quite interwoven. And now, the core issue, we talk about biodiversity. This is a very common map that everybody knows. We talk about the biodiversity hotspot. If you look clearly, this is a map of Africa, showing you those key areas that the richness of biodiversity, especially plant, are well known. For example, in South Africa, we all know about the Cape Floric region, which is about 78,000 kilometers square, with more than 9,000 plants. Interestingly, the take-home point in this area is that most of those plants are endemic to that area. It means you can find them anywhere else. That shows value. That shows, just like your mining, it's a gold mine. So this is quite rich. And I just want to borrow the word from Prof. Fakim that talked about why can't we capitalize on African biodiversity? We say some of these are unique to this area. How can we make economic benefit? How can we exploit this for medicine, for food? That is the key question. Those are some of the key concerns I really want us to think about as a panel today. This is also a very popular article that myself and the facilitator, Prof. Makunga, wrote, just to show you how much value we have in Africa. We just picked up 7 plants, and some of these are quite unique to some areas. They are used for diverse things. It shows the popularity, the impact of these bioresources. Nevertheless, the economic potential is still locked. There is still a lot to discover. And when we want to look at biodiversity, it's also important that I said is lack of documentation. So the first point of departure is these things must be documented. I talked about the non-systematic documentation, and we are actually having a lot of evidence to show that this is an effort researchers are actually addressing. And these are familiar books that most people know. This knowledge, once it's established now, it means we can refer to it. We can own it. It can be linked to a specific ethnic group. Also, there are success stories from our indigenous plant. This is a common plant, Pelargonium, which is actually available currently. It actually shows you that we just need to innovate and actually make money out of it, not just for medicine, for food. Different product. I'm not going to speak a lot about it. Dr. Masondo's field is going to actually elaborate on this, but there are a lot of potential and economic benefit. This is one area that there is no evidence or limited evidence. And from some of the studies we've done here in Northwest, we actually established that people know that this is actually a potential source of nutrition, of income to rural household. We also know that if all conditions are conducive, more than 93% of households from our sample are willing to pay for this indigenous food. It shows potential. And the government has recognized that very well. This was a screenshot I took from Department of Forestry. There is what they know as the biodiversity economy, the strategy, which has a lot of unlocked potential according to the transformation target, and they can quantify it in rands. These are the highlights. It shows the enormous potential available. And most importantly, the issue about legislation. This is one of the important legislation in South Africa that talks about the need to protect, to preserve, and to manage our indigenous knowledge. So the laws are there. We just need to tap into it. And this actually outlines the benefit and how to go about it from a legislative perspective. I know it's a very 5 minutes fly so by. So just to recall that in terms of us benefiting from this indigenous knowledge, I just want us to remember this important point. It's not in any particular order. The issue about documentation, very vital. Adding value. Dr. Masondo is going to speak extensively on that. Generating evidence. What do I need? You must be sure that this has nutritional potential. There must be empirical evidence. Legislation, we must be aware about the legislation that governs this biodiversity. I think at this point, this is just an opening statement, and I would just like other speakers. I'm back to you, Prof. Knox. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. I think we would bring on Sinegugu so that he can also share some insights in relation to this topic before we bring on Dr. Masondo. Sinegugu, over to you.
Right. Thank you very much, Knox, and greetings to everyone present in this meeting. I'll just outline a few points to say, as we all know, I'm bringing in the voices of the indigenous or local communities whose knowledge we are talking about today. It is important and very critical to note that indigenous people, for them, for this knowledge, they are dependent on pristine ecosystem. We need healthy ecosystems in order to be able to have a sustainable supply of these medicinal plants we're talking about, even in terms of the cultural practices. But that's often a challenge. It gets undermined in various ways because of exactly some of the points made by Prof earlier, to say this indigenous knowledge is not really it's only the beginning of it being recognized and seen as a critical knowledge. So it is, but to a certain extent, it's still being undermined. And as a result, when we're looking, for instance, at development, in terms of development projects, the indigenous knowledge systems or the dependence of indigenous people or local communities on pristine environment is often overlooked. Even when doing the EIAs, is usually a box-ticking exercise. The indigenous people, for them to be able to keep this particular knowledge going active, do need pristine environment, pristine oceans, pristine rivers, pristine grasslands, pristine in indigenous forests. So healthy ecosystems is what drives and what produce these ecosystem goods and services that are essential for a living culture, a living indigenous knowledge system. And in our society, when we're talking about building roads, when we're talking about the oil and gas economy of our oceans, this particular body of knowledge is not really prioritized. When I say not prioritize, I mean decisions are not changed because people, they are raising those particular issues. It's often seen as non-essential. And it is important, therefore, to say the bearers of this knowledge have to be able to stand up. I think also on the other point raised by what Prof has said, is in the sense of commercialization, the access, the benefit sharing, the so-called the ABS. Often researchers, they come, academics from this university, they come and do research and take this knowledge, and rural people, they willingly share this knowledge, which is a very critical knowledge about the values of these medicinal plants. But sometimes the researchers who come, they are not really experts when it comes to the protection of that particular knowledge, and they do their research, they share the knowledge. Remember, researchers, when they come to do research, you are also you are told that whatever you contribute to the researcher remains anonymous. And it's something that one day we need to talk about. This being anonymous, but you are sharing a body of knowledge, but academics, they want you to remain anonymous. They say to protect you. But I really don't know. There are cases where there are some serious security cautions, but more than often, people have to. So we're saying this knowledge gets put in books, put in journals, then come the pharmaceutical, they steal the knowledge. Because the plant is mentioned, they go, they find the plant, they propagate it, they do their own thing without even the researcher knowing. So what is happening is that the more these rural communities put their knowledge out there, there are more chances of this knowledge being stolen by those who want to make money for themselves. There are many cases in South Africa that we could mention. It costs an arm and a half to try and to fight and to chase those. We know the cases about the rooibos in South Africa. We know about the Hoodia. But there are many other cases that no one is talking about because they do not even know. Because the rural communities, they share knowledge kindly, not knowing that the researcher or somebody will steal the information that comes from them. So in terms of having this knowledge protected, to an extent that I become very conflicted when I've got researchers who want to research about the medicinal plants, because you share and then you put knowledge into books, but then there are vultures out there who are standing to steal the knowledge and to make money for themselves. And last but not least, Knox, I'd like to mention to say, these indigenous people, local people who are the bearers of this knowledge, they are not yet taken seriously. For instance, you can look at the formula that is used for beneficiation. Look at the percentage which is given to the people who are the owners of the knowledge. Often we hear 5%, 6%, to the most it would be 10%. But these are the people who are the bearers who live in that biodiversity hotspot. I come from Pondoland, and my home is within the Maputo and Pondoland Alban hotspot. So we are sitting with 196 endemic plants. It's not as rich as the Cape Fynbos, but we are. But then the amount of percentage which is given to those people in the ABS is ridiculous. Again, which signifies what I'm saying, that these bearers of this knowledge are not taken seriously. They are not seen as significant, as much as it is the knowledge that is going to bring profit. Why would they be given so little if their knowledge was seen as being vital? It's another critical question that as we go forward, we need to raise those particular questions, that it is too early and a lot needs to be done in order for the bearers of indigenous knowledge to be able to realize real benefits. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sinegugu, for this, bringing up these topics which are in some cases quite contentious. I think we've had two wonderful presentations with quite interesting views in relation to the opportunities that are afforded to us by the biodiversity that exists in South Africa, and then bringing in the human element in relation to that exploitation of that biodiversity by Sinegugu. These have been really quite wonderful. I really do invite the audience to interact with the chat box. If you have questions, please pop them in the chat so that we can pose them to the panelists. Now, I call upon Dr. Nqobile Masondo, who's also going to give us a 5 to 7 minute presentation. Nqobile, we look forward to hearing what you've got to tell us.
Okay, thank you very much, Program Director. So as a bit has been mentioned by Prof. Aremu, I'll be focusing on the processing and the commercialization of medicinal plants. So how can Africa and South Africa as a whole benefit from the indigenous knowledge that has been passed down from generation to generation, and that has been actually proven to some extent to be beneficial to the human needs. So, and these can actually be assist in terms of adding towards the South African GDP. So I'll firstly start at the top level, where I look at the global aspect. So in terms of the global herbal medicine market size, we actually, so far in 2023, there was an estimated more than $216 billion that has been looked at in terms of the size of this market, with a projected $437 billion by 2030. This actually gives you about 8.17% of the focus in terms of the period and how the global market space is towards the herbal medicine, which is actually, one could say that there is value in medicinal plants, and there's a need for South Africa to actually tap into this space. As has been said, the number of indigenous medicinal plants that we have is actually extensive for us actually to miss out in some of these necessary niche areas where we are well capable. So what are some of the driving market trends in terms of medicinal plants? We've got application as primary medicine, which includes your coughs, your cold, your gastrointestinal diseases, some of the pain and inflammation. And the most important one is in terms of being immune boosters, these medicinal plants. And this links closely with their application in the pharmaceutical industry. And then we've got application towards looking at some of your nutraceuticals, your food and beverages, and your personal care and beauty products. And to say that in terms of the global and even South African market, the cosmetics or cosmeceutical market is actually one of the top markets that most of the countries are actually moving towards adding some of those cosmetics, especially because beauty and personal care are very necessary, and there's a lot of products that people are putting out there in terms of the industries for such. So when we look at some of the bit of statistics again, more than 50% of clinically tested pharmaceutical drugs used in the world are actually derived from our traditional medicinal plants, from some of those practices. And these form as a basis for a number of indigenous people, because that's where the knowledge comes from. And about 10,000 medicinal plants have actually been documented for their traditional uses, of which about 200 have been developed into Western and pharmaceutical medicine. And according to the World Health Organization, about 11% of the 250 drugs in the market are considered essential for your basic health care needs. They are derived from your medicinal plants. A few of those examples is your artemisinin from Artemisia annua, which is assist in terms of anti-malaria. You've got your morphine for poppy plant, and there's actually so much that is in the market that these plants have been beneficial in terms of isolating specific compounds and developing the products. And then when we bring it closer to home in South Africa, we, as Prof. Aremu has actually mentioned, is that we are lacking the economics or the status of where we are sitting. A while back, there was information that the traditional medicine trade in South Africa is actually estimated to be worth 2.9 billion rands. And 22 million of these consumers, they're actually put in the trade, and then it's a vibrant and widespread space that is typically used within either the informal or the formal market, but mainly the informal market. And then there's actually at least more than 133,000 people that are employed in the trade, with a large percentage of them being rural women. And the trade of medicinal plant still forms a key industry in the business incubation, not only for women, but even for young entrepreneurs that are interested in actually going ahead with this extensive knowledge and industry that is booming. And the market has been experiencing steady growth, and that is driven by increasing consumer interest in the herbal products, especially because the more these products are taken into the market, your clicks and all the other markets, the more the people are having more interest, especially the younger generation, having more interest in terms of using them. And those are some of the aspects that one has to look at. How then do we focus the value that the informal market has put for us in terms of the medicinal plants, and also how then can we take them to the formal market? And within the formal market, not only in South Africa or Africa, but also internationally, to benefit our GDP and also to create good industries and businesses within some of these medicinal plants. So some of the key drivers for the interest in your herbal medicine or medicinal plants, it's well known, is there a long history of successful use and safety in terms of treating various diseases. And there's an interestingly increasing open market in different parts of the continent for the acceptance of herbal medicine and exchange material. For instance, China and India have really gotten into the space of the commercialization of their own indigenous knowledge into the market, not only within their continent, but globally. And I think also Africa has to come into that space to benefit the continent. And then we also look at the evolution of new biotechnology processing techniques that have make the creation of herbal medicine easier. So this includes your packaging equipment, buying all these necessary equipment, including your tea bag machine, your capsule machine, or all the other equipments that could help, or finding processors that can help some of the young and small business scales to incubate them in terms of doing some of these processing. The potentially less costly development of many medicinal plants, it gives the extract, gives some of the medicinal plants ability to be easily put in the market, because they don't need additional spaces or phases in terms of isolation. They can simply be packaged into different formulation and then put in the market. And then there's also greater awareness of the need for the movement on the collaboration between the industry, the government, and academia, as well as our local communities, to bring herbal medicine into the market. And this is very necessary. This intensive collaboration between all these stakeholders is very necessary to cover up the bases in terms of the indigenous people should not lack and should or not be given such small royalties or percentage when it comes to such information that would be part of their own indigenous knowledge and generational wealth in a sense. And then lastly, the government initiatives that are aimed at increasing the number of herbal medicine in markets, they are increasing. And also we can see that the South African government is actually bringing it into the space so that the agro-processing and the processing space become the drivers in terms of assisting our small scale farmers and all your indigenous knowledge holders. Thank you very much, Program Director.
Nqobile, thank you so much. That was really wonderful, especially to get a global perspective in relation to the utilization of medicinal plants and bringing in these aspects that are linked to the bioeconomy and how we can actually derive public goods, generate some money out of our flora. There has been a wonderful sharing of ideas and insights thus far from our panelists. I really thank you all for your contributions. And now I'd like to open it up to questions that have been submitted via the Eventbrite platform. There are several different questions that are available there. And my first question is actually to Prof. Aremu, Adi. How best to integrate indigenous knowledge with scientific knowledge? What possibilities are available for us to be able to do that? The integration of indigenous knowledge with scientific knowledge.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. Knox. I think this actually was part of the point I did highlight in my presentation. You need to know what you want to integrate. That's actually a very good point of departure. And also when it comes to integration, I also think just like what Sinegugu said, it's very important that we come as partners, which by we understand is a dialogue across board, not indigenous knowledge being forced on site and Western knowledge or the other way around. It's about talking, it's about sharing ideas. We all have the same problem, whether indigenous or whatever, we have the same problem. It's about how do we address this problem as collective. And in fact, I think one of the reasons why discussion is very important in response to what Sinegugu said about why do you want a knowledge holders to be anonymous? It doesn't make sense. And I think in recent time, the discussion within the scientific community is that this is not a research or something we should be ashamed of. It's a proud knowledge. It's for you to put a face to the product. So it's a discussion. In fact, I've got colleagues now who, when they present, they show the faces of the knowledge holders. So this is about integrating. And this is about, we have like a tool using Western knowledge, like a tool using indigenous knowledge. And those tools don't speak to each other. So that's where the problem is. And this kind of conversation helps to understand why we're doing this. Why do we want them to be anonymous? Does it make sense? And I agree with him perfectly. So integration must start with conversation, must start with understanding the legislation and the purpose of why we want to do it. I'll try to keep it short because I know we're running out of time. Thanks, Knox.
Yeah, these topics are really pretty complex. And, you know, we really need to rethink the way that we value IKS in relation to scientific knowledge. And that in itself is a very large discussion. So now I want to interrogate Sinegugu a little bit here. I want to better understand, and this was another question that was posed from the Eventbrite platform, what strategies can be implemented to change misconceptions about traditional remedies, especially in a formalized healthcare system? And how can we then also empower indigenous communities to protect their ethnopharmacological knowledge? whilst it's still being recognized in a contemporary society? That there's quite a lot to think about there. So I'm just going to highlight some of the key points to that question. How do we change misconceptions about traditional remedies? And then secondly, how do we empower Indigenous communities to protect their ethnopharmacological knowledge whilst it's still fitting society?
Okay. All right. Okay. There is a need for attitude change for all of us, because as it is, the Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous people are still, people who have not been to formal education are still being treated as second citizens. That's a global issue. So a need for change, recognizing that African Indigenous schooling system is also an education. If somebody who never went to school was able to understand that if you take maize and take it through fermentation process up until it's able to produce beer, which is the indigenous beer, and we still in the mainstream of learning, we regard that as indigenous knowledge instead of indigenous science. So even how we are, I'm very happy with Prof. Oludapo has been referring to indigenous science, and it's very rare in the academic field to hear of that. But there is a lot of the indigenous scientific knowledge which has been developed. Even when we're talking about medicine, the fact that people have been able to take a particular plant, they have tested it, they have been able to find that it works, and when they give it to you, you use it, and then it heals or it treats sickness. I think for me, there is no bigger science than that. So, but how often do we hear from the academics, the researchers, referring to this indigenous knowledge as indigenous science, so there is a need for change. That's what I mean. There is a need for change from all of us. Two, we actually don't have to devise any strategies for people to change their misconception, because if you are wise and you use your mind, you can see, you go to any pharmacy today, you find the so-called herbal products, which are the products that have been derived from, if you look at, you go to Clicks and you find the Avochel, a collection of medicines, and they are all coming from the indigenous people, some of them from the Amazonian. So it is anybody in his or her right state of mind sees and knows that the herbal medicine is actually becoming realized that it's more powerful than your synthetic medicine. That's something which is out there and is also safer in terms of the side effects. I'm not a scientist, so that's something that scientists should tell us. So it is out there, and of course, indigenous people, the reason why we would say yes, there is a need for empowering indigenous people is because as indigenous people, we are made to be subjected to the Western system. And the Western system is very complicated, is very, it has got a lot of admin because the laws are coming from the Western system, and we are supposed to take our indigenous system and package it for the Western system. And then as a result, therefore, that throws people off because you want them to operate and to work through the legal system that they are not familiar with. And then there is a need there. But I think more than anything, the people here who need also to help, the universities, they have a very big role to play in terms of protecting. Remember, Prof started saying we need to have this knowledge documented. And in the process of documenting this knowledge, we make it available. And in that process, researchers, they need to be amongst the ethics they need to do when they go and research and get this knowledge. one of the things they need to do is to have this knowledge registered. This is registration of patents that belong to so and so. That's something that the researchers have got to take responsibility, because a certain Mr. Dlamini in the rural areas who knows about that medicine doesn't know about where you go to register these patents and all that. But the researchers, they know, and they are the ones who are taking the knowledge and they're exposing it. And it is important. And I think whoever who takes knowledge and expose it must therefore be prepared to help the custodian of the knowledge, the indigenous people, to make sure that their knowledge doesn't get stolen or poached, and then they end up getting nothing. Universities have a role to play, even in terms of challenging these things, like the remaining anonymous, things about what percentage goes to these people who are the holders of this particular knowledge. So I think, yes, of course, government legislation is there, but we know that government is like a parent with many children, many wives everywhere, and they cannot be everywhere to police. And that's why I'm sitting on academics and researchers who go and then expose this, that they do have a role. Of course, there are civil society organizations like NGOs who know who are the people who are the holders of this knowledge. They also need to assist these people in rural areas to register these patents and for them to be able to have this, so that they can see the benefits which come back to those rural areas. I thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was really quite a comprehensive and very passionate answer. And these are very difficult conversations. The legislation is also tricky and complicated for researchers, university folk, and even the man on the street. And now just thinking about the man or woman on the ground, Nqobile, how do you think people that are, that are interested in profiting from Indigenous knowledge, how do they go about this? But at the same time, how do we preserve this knowledge whilst trying to make profits out of it for the man or woman on the street?
Okay, thank you very much, Knox. I think I'll also just want to firstly highlight the preservation, which goes hand in hand with the profit out of the medicinal plants. Firstly, the need for conservation strategies in terms of having our own propagation in terms of cultivation of the medicinal plant that you want to put in the market is necessary. And this will minimize the issues in terms of having a batch-to-batch variation within your medicine that is in the market. And also, it will conserve our medicinal plants. We've actually lost a lot of some of these medicinal plants, some of them are near extinction, some we might not even know they've already been extinct, and those would have been beneficial. So that need in terms of whoever comes into this space, having to have a clear goal of the projections in terms of whatever you've developed, what you've developed, it has a much market potential, then that one goes through those necessary conservation and propagation and cultivation of these medicinal plants within a certain space. And this will also bring together the farmers to benefit from that. If you, as the owner of the IP in terms of the product, you cannot do it, you can always liaise with farmers, which means that it adds in terms of income generation, job opportunities, and also the GDP. And then also when we come to how can the communities benefit? So there's been some work that has been done here in terms of how can communities benefit, but unfortunately, it's not well put out for everyone to know. And that is a necessity from us to work around. There's a lot of incubation hubs that have been created. We've got spaces like your DARAT, the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, your SEDA, which is Small Enterprise Development Agencies, your TIA, which is Technology Innovation, some of the council institutions like your CSIR, your ARC, the universities, and some of the independent companies. Some of these become incubators for the communities and the indigenous knowledge holders, that they could go into those spaces and request for assistance in terms of they've got a formulation and they want to take it a step further, whether it's testing the plants themselves, if they are in terms beneficial, as one would say, looking at the safety aspect in terms of the dose dependency based on the person's formulation, and also looking at which packaging strategies can they go to, and some of the industries that can assist them in terms of packaging, and also going further into the understanding the market analysis and some of the necessary certificates that all of these products require before it can go to the market. Because unfortunately, the way or the strategy in terms of from product development up until the market, your product is in the market, it's very rigorous and it needs a lot of information. So it would also be good if there would be a system in terms of within the agro-processing sector where a formulated step by step, but I know that at the end of the day, we're not going to have the same strategy in terms of when you're producing cosmetics, it's different from when you're producing nutraceuticals or your food. But to help those that are actually interested and the need for more of the what our government going in and putting and pitching some of these necessary implementation plans. And also these incubation hubs, some of them, unfortunately, they don't provide funding. So this is another place where the government needs to step up, because some of the spaces, you need to get loans in order for you to start the businesses. And some of them, they are not feasible for your local men in the streets or in that market, there in the multi-market, that is just looking out for getting possibly 200 Rand per day. So they will not be able to be granted those loans. So the government also needs to come in here and assist this industry, because if we do not go and join what China and India have done, we will lose our indigenous knowledge. We've seen some of these indigenous knowledge and some of our medicinal plants being taken internationally, and they come back as products to South Africa. Your aloe is for an example. There's quite a lot of products, but how many of those products are developed by South Africans? And aloe is indigenous in Africa, but right now we are getting products internationally. So those factors need to be looked at by all stakeholders. I'm not only going to put government into this, even scientists. All stakeholders, university, and everyone should be able to address and assist these problems that the indigenous knowledge holders struggle with. Thank you.
Thanks, Nqobile. That was very, very comprehensive as well, and it is pretty complicated. Now, I actually want to move to some of these questions that are in the chat, while still being aware of our time limitations. So my first question would be, that's come from the chat: what specific indigenous practices and knowledge have proven effective in addressing climate-related challenges in South Africa? I think this is a wonderful question, and we haven't necessarily touched on this particular topic. And I open it up to any of the three panel members that can provide us an answer.
Okay. I'll make mine to be very short because I've got an evidence to actually speak directly to this question. I actually sent a link. I think the question was asked by Sekile. So there's a Nature paper done by myself and some other colleagues. We showed an example across the world, water harvesting, indigenously done. It's saving a lot of crop for productivity. So there's quite a number of examples. Even things like your agricultural seed, the use of smoke so that it can actually ensure resilience of the seed. So there's quite a number of examples, but because of time, please just take a look at that Nature paper. But climate change and indigenous knowledge people, remember, they are living on the land. They've been adapting to the land. They've been surviving on the land. So they've actually gained this experience over time. Because of time, I'll give the other panel members, perhaps they have one or two other points. Thank you, Knox.
Yes, Knox, I can also say, in terms of, if you're looking at the indigenous knowledge practices, there are the whole lot that address that speak to climate change. For instance, if you're looking at the question of rangelands management, how do people manage the grasslands with the grazing? Well, I know in Sesotho they have what they call mabuyela. In the Xhosa we have what we call amadobo tobokhasi. How you manage, which is all about rotational resting. And rotational resting, there's also a lot of information about how you manage fires. There are customary laws that speak to how you manage fires. And we know that when you burn a lot, when you don't manage, when you don't allow the grass to grow, for instance, you are letting the carbon to be lost from the ground. Grasslands, they are the biggest sinkers of carbon. So there is a whole lot that people could, how they manage their rangelands, how they manage their indigenous forests. There are very clear regimes in terms of how herbalists, indigenous people, collect the medicine like a bark from a tree. Like in Bondoland, where I come from, the bark traditionally is collected on the north-facing side of the tree, because if you collect on the north-facing side, where the tree gets most longer hours of sun rays, so the tree is able to recover quickly. But if you collect, so it is forbidden to collect on the south-facing side, because the tree is going, it's not going to heal quickly, and then the wood might end up drying up and then rotting. So there's a whole lot in terms of how people manage the environment, and through the indigenous knowledge practices that are able to support, that align well with adaptation to climate change. So there's a whole lot that maybe that we would need Jive Media another session to be speaking to climate change, the adaptation practices that relate to the indigenous knowledge, how people have done things. And that particular knowledge is actually being lost, because in the mainstream of what the universities are teaching our young people, these indigenous practices of how things are done in the indigenous way are not being brought in into the mainstream in terms of what the people they are learning. As a result, that knowledge is being lost. So there's a whole lot. We can talk into fishing, we can talk into rivers. There's a whole lot of knowledge that is very useful that needs to come to the mainstream, so that it's part of the curriculum, and the graduates that come out of university need to have, so that that knowledge could be promoted and be able to be carried forward for a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you for your wonderful insights, and to the audience, thank you very much for the questions. We've just got a few minutes that are left over for us to wrap up. And I really want to express my sincere thanks to Eddie, Sinegugu, and Nqobile. I think this has been a wonderful, interesting, and highly significant conversation, especially in relation to indigenous knowledge, indigenous science, ethnopharmacology, and now even touching on issues that are related to climate change. So before we head out, I just want to invite all of us to the next OGRC Tipping Points webinar, and that is scheduled for the 31st of October. So please make sure you look out for announcements, and also follow the link in the chat box in relation to those announcements. And the focus is going to be linked to social and economic justice, and how that is integral in a climate crisis. So do sign up for the newsletter. This is a quarterly newsletter that the OGRC puts out. You can find that in the link as well. And if you've missed any part of this particular webinar, or you'd like to revisit it, and even perhaps to tap into old webinars that you might have missed, the OGRC YouTube, Oppenheimer Generations Research and Conservation YouTube, is a wonderful resource to access past and this particular webinar. In addition, a summary of this webinar will also be available on the OGRC website. And I think we've had a wonderful afternoon. And I'd just like to again thank our panelists, thank Drive Media for the invitation, and thank the OGRC for hosting this particular webinar. And I hope that you'll be participating in future webinars where the discussion is linked to tipping points. And these will be webinars in October. And I think the next one is really going to be quite wonderful because somehow it integrates with the very last question that was linked to IKF and climate change. And just as a reminder, it will focus on social and economic justice in a way that is integral to facing down the climate crisis. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. It's been really fascinating for me. And I say farewell, and I hope you have a lovely Thursday afternoon and a Friday morning. And with that, I say goodbye.